Welcome, everyone, to the How to Get the Most Out of College podcast. There's a lot of talk about where to go to college, but not nearly enough about how to go to college. And it's the everyday decisions that drive your success. I'm your host, Elliot Felix. I've been a consultant to more than 100 colleges and universities, helping them improve their student experience. And I'm the author of How to Get the Most Out of College, where I take what I've learned about how college works and make it work for you.
This episode is going to be a little different. Instead of interviewing another higher ed expert or a student, I'm sharing a talk I gave about libraries as hubs for student success. This was a keynote I gave at the annual conference for the Council of Academic Library Directors. And when they called me, I jumped at the chance to talk about how libraries can help students succeed by being places where they can find a sense of community and belonging, where they can build the skills they need and work on projects with impact, and maybe even find a future career path within libraries. Give it a listen. Let me know what you think. I thought a great place to get started as we think about libraries and student success is how you define it. What are your top 3 ways you define student success? Is it about students forming an identity? Is it about belonging to a community? Is it about gaining independence, building skills, acquiring knowledge, feeling healthy, finding a meaningful career, being prepared for the future? Of course, it's all of these. As you work with campus and community partners, having some shared definition of what we mean by student success is a great place to start, and thinking about what it is we're trying to do and how we can do it even better going into the future. It's really all of these, and they're interrelated, right? Because if you have the skills, if you have the knowledge, if you feel a sense of belonging, then you're certainly more likely to be healthy. You're certainly more likely to find a meaningful career and be prepared for the future. So what I'm going to talk about is really 3 stories about how libraries can create and enable and further and advance student success, building on some of the things we just talked about, building community, integrating support, and enabling projects. So when it comes to building community and belonging, this is a place where libraries can play an amazing role because libraries belong to and are for everyone. And as campuses think about big tents and small niches, libraries can do both. And we really need to do both because there is really a crisis of belonging. Next to finances, belonging is the second biggest reason that students don't continue. And only about 2/3 of students feel that sense of belonging. And this is from the National College Health Assessment, which is, a pretty big sample of folks and the best data I know on this. NESE has this at, much higher, which is frankly harder to believe, but I think it really is a crisis of belonging, and it overlaps with a mental health crisis, with a retention crisis, but also I think an opportunity for libraries to create spaces that students feel a sense of ownership over and services in the same way, whether it's because they're using them, because they're providing them in a peer-to-peer mode. And I had the chance a few years ago to create what became known as the LaGuardia Co-op at NYU, which was really a library adjacent project. The other 2 will be proper library projects, but I thought it might be interesting to share a collaborative space that was really NYU's reinvention of their computer labs. And it starts with understanding the context, because NYU was really trying to integrate with the neighborhood, to not turn its back on the street, to grow, to advance creativity. These were all parts of the university strategy. Meanwhile, they had computer labs that, if you think back 10 years ago, were, rows and rows of desktop computers for students to work individually. Mostly they got used as print centers, or places to check email or print out a problem set. And in fact, that's what our data showed when we asked students and surveyed thousands of NYU students why they were using them. And we thought there was an opportunity to do something different. So through a lot of research, surveys, interviews, observations, students were really looking for a place to collaborate and create. There was kind of mixed satisfaction with the current spaces, in part because they were these, print stations. They weren't places to create something, to whiteboard, to make a prototype, to work together on things, to record a podcast. And that's really what the students wanted to do, is they wanted to create and collaborate. And so we took that idea
And we actually worked with the students to name the spaces. And it was quite interesting because that creating and collaborating really rose to the top. The other thing that came out of the naming workshops with the students was feeling like home. They wanted it to feel like home, and they wanted it to reference the place they were in. They wanted it to be in and of the city, in and of New York, which is a key part of the NYU brand. And so we came up with the name of LaGuardia Co-op because obviously LaGuardia is a New York name. It's got currency. That's also the street they were on. And people think about co-ops as places to live, but also places to cooperate, right? Places to work together. So we named the places with the students that gave them a whole sense of ownership. And in true fashion, they got even more creative because the co-op ended up getting kind of shortened to the coop. And people started to think of it jokingly as kind of like a chicken coop. And somebody drew like a comic for effectively a superhero chicken, which became sort of the mascot for the spaces. And, you'd find it on whiteboards and, then people created even better comics and they were posted around. So students really felt a sense of ownership over the space, in part because they were so involved in creating it and using it and also providing the services, tons of peer-to-peer services, students doing office hours, I'll help you with R, or I'll help you with SPSS, or I'll help you with podcasting. And to do that, we really had to prototype the services, test them out, see how students could play new roles, doing role play, doing service blueprints, and then measuring our success. And this was really quite stunning because we were able to really move the needle on students' satisfaction with the space, with the technology, with the staff, and the service they provided. So media production spaces, classrooms, podcast studios, VR studios, maker spaces. One of my favorite statistics when we did the post-occupancy analysis of the space and of the services and of the staffing, we found that when we looked at like login data, the use of, checking email went down 59%, and then using like Creative Suite and other applications to actually create things went up. So it went from this kind of like print and email place to this real place to connect and collaborate and create. So mission accomplished. The second story I want to share with you is one about bringing together different campus supports. And this is really, I think, a great opportunity for libraries because in our national survey, I think we can all take a fair amount of pride in the fact that of the 68 things we measure, library spaces are number 2. They're the things that students are the second most happy with. For whatever reason, they're happier with their student portal, but I think only by 1 percentage point. So students are pretty darn happy with library spaces nationally, which is pretty great. But they're less happy with library services. Still pretty good at 63%. But I think there's an opportunity to close that gap and bring them closer together, and to close the gap together with campus partners. That's a story I'll share about University of Miami Learning Commons, which brought together a variety of different partners to enable student success in terms of learning, instruction, community, technology, and so much more. And I think the reason it was successful and the reason it brought these things together is we actually started with the student competencies. We got together, we had the vice provost for undergraduate education, we had the library dean, associate deans, CIO, other academic leadership, and we really thought about what are the competencies we're trying to create and instill in our students. Being able to work on a team, being able to work with data, being able to create things, being able to communicate what you create, being able to do the research that enables all those things, thinking about the student competencies. And then that really drove the service model, the staffing model, and the space so that we were creating a space that enables independent, effective learners to identify, critically analyze, and apply information and technology, and the skills to do that across disciplines, teams, and cultures. And so doing that meant, of course, a whole myriad of library services, but also many different partners across the campus, the Academic Research Center, ARC, tutoring, writing, working with faculty, working with advisors, mapping this all out, that we then had to think about how they could work together to enable student success. And that working together really had to be mission-based, and it had to create a community of practice among all these different library professionals, student service providers, faculty. And we had to do it in a way that avoids what I call the library land grab, which is, collections move out and then people think like, oh, what unrelated functions can I stuff in the library? We actually had to do it in a way that was meaningful, mission-based, and dare I say, found some actual synergies. I know as a consultant, you can't really say synergies, but I sort of have to, because we really did see these opportunities for 1 + 1 to make 11, because you can imagine a student engaged in research who, in the course of that consultation, you realize that, the thesis is not that sharp and a referral to the writing center just makes sense, or you realize that, the data in figure 1, doesn't quite make the case and it's time to go to the stats lab. And so we're really trying to find these meaningful relationships and think about how much of what kind of space needed to be designated or dedicated and what kind of partners they could be. So some things, it was kind of their headquarters or their HQ. So they moved into the library, like the tech support, like GIS, like the math lab, like the writing center. Others, the library became like a satellite location for them. Learning innovation, the Center for Teaching and Learning Excellence, tutoring, learning and research services, digital strategies. Others were more visiting for programs, consultations, doing workshops, office hours. And then others might be supporting behind the scenes. They might not be student facing, but super critical, because if the systems don't work, if the spaces aren't there, aren't configured, if the workshop room is tables in rows instead of in clusters, everything falls apart. Or if you don't have the website or the systems in place for people to book the appointment or check out the equipment or find the source, then it doesn't work. So we really thought about these different partners, these different ways to partner, how to not do it as the library land grab, but really create a community of practice. And to do that, it took thinking through how individual roles would change, which roles might be new, which roles might be enhanced or changed in some way, people shedding some old responsibilities, taking on new ones. Those were the enhanced. And then some things might more or less stay the same. Of course, nothing stays the same, but predominantly so. And then finding lots of ways to test these, to prototype. And it might be like just doing a read through, getting around the table and reading through a scene or a scenario, a use case. It might be like role play, like, effectively a dress rehearsal. It might be a walkthrough or a mock-up. It might be a real pilot. And these are really great ways to test things out, to build that sense of ownership, to kind of manage the change process. And you can always scale it up or down, right? If people don't want to pilot a new service point for a semester, you can do it for a week. And if they don't want to do it for a week, you can do it for a day, as a pop-up. And we've certainly done that. And putting it all together, it came out great. This was a first floor space that used to be filled with stacks. We retained some of the stacks, but opened up and shifted things to really focus on study and support and do it in a flexible way. Those aren't hardwired to anything. You could pick them up and move them around, right? If, one day you need more space for learning and less for creating, you can do that. And as you think back to that service model of create and communicate and analyze, each of those things has a home in the Learning Commons, right? There's a GIS and data lab. There's a prototyping makerspace. There is a communication space, a creative space. These things map one-to-one between the competency, the space, and the service and the staff. And finally, I want to talk about the third community, let's say, for libraries and student success, because in my work with all these institutions, I typically see these three barriers as common themes, right? A sense of belonging, a lack of support, and then not seeing the connection between courses and careers. And courses and careers are really the kind of the critical link you're trying to establish so that students feel prepared, and even more so that they feel a sense of purpose, because that career path and the sense that you're making progress along it, that is incredibly motivating. And that is really a helpful thing if you can make that connection and students can feel like they're making an impact. And I think as more learning goes hybrid and online, and as more learning becomes experiential, let's hope, there is a greater and greater role for libraries to become hubs for experiential learning and for projects that enable students to make and faculty to make a meaningful impact. And there is really a hunger for it. I think in Wiley's recent survey, 81% of students think work on real world projects, what they called company-led projects. And of course, there's other versions of that, of, civic engagement and service learning. But in this case, company-led projects, 81% students think it's very important. When they poll faculty, only 30% do that. So there's a gap there, which is curricular change and culture change, but it's also something that the library can catalyze and support. And I had the good fortune of working with University of Rochester to create what became known as the iZone, to do this kind of support and to help students with social impact projects. And to do that, you really need to understand the context and you need to map it out to figure out where you fit in. And our hunch, our hypothesis was that students had lots of ideas for projects that might have social or community or economic or cultural impact. Maybe they want to start a film series or a podcast or a volunteer project. And the way the university was kind of set up, or adjacent campus partners, the external side of things, they're really focused on entrepreneurship for ideas that are best made manifest in a company. But a podcast or a film series or writing a book or a screenplay, those don't necessarily belong at the business school's entrepreneurship center, although maybe they do. So we really tried to fill this gap, this niche, for students who needed a space to explore an idea rather than, before they were ready to, say, turn it into a company. And to build the skills, as you all mentioned, so critical for student success, to find team members and to find mentors, to learn along the way, to showcase their work. And so that really became the vision statement for the iZone as a creative problem-solving space. It's also a program and a community, and it's designed to empower students to explore and imagine ideas for social, cultural, community, and economic impact. And with that idea, through all those conversations, we assembled or compiled a whole series of use cases, right? The activities, that's just sort of a fancy way of saying like a scenario or a set of activities that students are going to be engaged in that we want to better support. And it might be about, building community at a hackathon that helps you form a team for a project or getting inspiration. And so we thought about, okay, given all these use cases and given the vision, and given all the partners and the other people sort of in adjacent spaces, what should we offer? How should we fit in? And the programs and services really fit in these three buckets: the idea of building community and networking, so helping students find team members, find people to work on things with, find mentors, and then generating and exploring ideas and getting advice on those ideas. So, what kinds of programs are going to help them generate, like learn how to brainstorm, for instance, which is a real, there's an art and a science to that. And then what are the skills they need? It might be about leading a team. It might be about defining roles for that team, or it might be about, creating your pitch deck. And so we then, with these ideas, created a whole set of services and programs to support. And those services and programs, they needed space. So then we thought about how much of what kind of space, and took over or compressed an old IT function within the library that was really kind of a dead computer lab. You've seen these, hopefully you still don't have these on your campus, but, rows and rows of desktops, pushed aside and students using their laptop and maybe the monitor, and really tried to bring new life, breathe new life into that space, creating a flexible presentation space, consolidating the computer lab function, creating open workspaces, lots of variety, booths, rooms, places to record things, record a podcast, record a pitch, do a remote interview, consult with experts, meet a mentor. And then we also had to think through the staffing model, the operating model for this, because how are we going to support these services? And we quickly settled on a peer-to-peer model where it was really about leveraging students, initially community coordinators that, they ended up being renamed fellows, iZone fellows, and having a whole cast of characters of students supporting these different spaces and providing the services on a peer-to-peer basis, like doing that team building workshop or consultation, or learning how to brainstorm, or getting feedback on the idea, or honing the pitch deck. And then we thought about the governance model. We thought about the service volumes, mapping out the day of the week of the semester, the staffing needed at each time, and then thinking through, okay, this is how many positions we need to make it happen. It really turned out quite well, and really a place within the library, led by the library in partnership with so many others, for students to work on the kinds of projects that give them a sense of purpose, give them a career path, give them a chance to make an impact, and to do all the things you all noted as cornerstones of student success, right? Acquiring knowledge, building skills, learning in a community, building that sense of community. And so with those stories in mind and thinking about belonging and support, as we transition to Q&A, I'd love to hear from you what you might see as your barriers, because then I can kind of problem solve with you about how you might get over or even around them. Growing up, this was kind of counterintuitive. I played goalie on our soccer team. And one thing I still remember to this day, like my coach instilling in me, like the less time you have, the slower you go, right? Because you have to be more focused. If you're in the final minute, like you can't afford to make a mistake. You're not going to get a second chance. So having that clear strategy or focus is so critical.
Thanks everyone for listening. Remember to subscribe, rate, and review us wherever you get your podcasts. And check out elliottfelix.com for all the episodes and the articles I've written, talks I've given, and more information about the book.